Good to see you, Bob.
Great to see you. Thanks for coming out.
Thanks for having us here. So I'm looking at SPARC, and this is a prototype you've built, and it's on track to become the first commercially produced machine that generates net energy from fusion.
That's right.
Yes?
That's exactly right.
You know, what would that milestone mean for science, for the fusion sector, for CFS once you turn it on?
Yeah, I think the way to think about it is you break it into pieces, right? Like different time frames. So, long-term fusion is a hugely disruptive energy source. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that, but that is a huge amount of promise. Medium term, we have to get the first generation of fusion power plants built. This is not a plant, but it's the step right before that. And the fact that that step, which is sort of the last step you need to truly have confidence in how a fusion power plant works, what are all the parts, how do you put it together, that step is happening right now here. And so this facility is really the only one like it in the world. And it's taking all the science that's happened in fusion for a long time, summing it up with the supply chain and with the ability to build at scale, and then putting that into a prototype machine. And that's what you're seeing here is SPARC, the actual machine itself that at the heart of it creates the fusion reactions. And we're standing in a room that's in the middle of a plant, a full facility that has all the things that make this machine operate.
Yes. Okay. So SPARC is the prototype, and what follows SPARC is what you call ARC, which would be the world's first commercial scale fusion power plant outside of Richmond on the James River, right? And
that's right.
You're targeting the early 2030s?
That's right. So like you can think of the company, Commonwealth Fusion Systems, we're the largest of the fusion companies in the world. We're one of the best capitalized next generation energy companies. And what we've been doing over the last 8 years since we were founded is to take this science and advance it towards that goal of large scale mini fusion power plants. And we're pretty much on the right track on that. We've got this machine about 80% complete. We're at the least complete part of the whole facility. And when this turns on, it'll give us a bunch of the last pieces of data that we want to see before we really go full speed on the commercial plant. As you mentioned, the first commercial plant, that one's going to be built in just outside of Richmond, Virginia. It's called the Fall Line Fusion Power Station. That's already through permitting. Still a couple things to do on connecting it to the grid, et cetera. But we're super excited because we can see the trajectory that we've laid out from the beginning actually happening of the technology, the science, the demonstration, the first commercial plants, and then there are more plants.
Is it too simplistic to think about SPARC is solving or proving you can solve the science risk, the science challenge, and ARC would be proving you can solve the engineering challenge, or is that? It's
a little bit misaligned with that, what's actually happening. So the science we know really well. We've done the science in fusion for a long time. And in fact, a couple of years ago, a large facility owned by the US government called NIF in California showed that you could get more power out than in of the fusion reaction itself. So the science here is well understood. This is really an engineering project of taking that science and putting it at scale. And then the commercial plant, ARC, that's really an economic indicator. That is, exactly what the cost of power will be, how long does it take to build at scale, how often does it need maintenance. That is more like a traditional energy project. This is the last point where we really see like the fundamentals of the engineering based on the science area.
Okay, so you mentioned that ARC is based outside of Richmond. That's proximate to Data Center Alley. And of course, data centers need power now. The estimates are that the electricity consumption globally from data centers will double between now and 2030, but ARC goes live in the early 2030s. So is the bet you're making that we're going to have chronic energy shortfalls for decades to come, not just from AI, but a whole range of other verticals?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And like, if you just look at the future projections of electricity use globally, they are up and to the right. It doesn't even matter who you ask. International bodies, national bodies. The world is electrifying, and we need more electricity to do things like data centers. Like today, actually data centers are a relatively small part of electricity, but they're the fastest growing part. Thus a lot of hand wringing. But there's other things that we need to do to electrify as well. We've got people that don't have electricity that want it, that need it, that demand it. We've got increased uses of electricity like air conditioning. We also have electrifying things that today run on fuels. So you think about cars going to EVs, you think about industrial processes and heat pumps and all these other things that are all in the projections to say that we're in an electrical century. And we right now do not have great ways to generate that electricity. That is leaving a lot to be desired. And so fusion plugs into that. And we're going as fast as we can go. We're always looking to go faster. And we're actually in the timeline that we have for data centers. We're in the timeline of other types of electricity generation.
Like SMRs and maybe nuclear restarts, geothermal.
Exactly. If you actually look at the scale out of energy today, SMRs are just starting to get started. They're picking sites. They're not really even constructing. We're in the same phase as that. If you look at buying a gas turbine from like a GE or Nova, right? That wait list is actually, you're not gonna get that turbine until the early 30s anyway. And so this is at a similar time scale. It's got a little bit different risk in the sense that like it's harder to understand. You can't go and see a fleet of them have already been installed, but you can't do that with SMRs either. And so we think it's a really important part of the near-term portfolio. And we think it's a quintessential part to the long-term portfolio.
So one energy technology that's available now, of course, is solar. And everyone knows the cost of solar is dropping exponentially. It's the cheapest form of electricity humans have ever produced. And batteries are getting much better at storing the energy from solar and delivering it when the sun doesn't shine. So how does fusion fit into that picture? Are you targeting a different niche in which you're clean 24/7, dispatchable, and that's different than what solar and batteries can offer?
We got to be really careful when we start to talk about like the costs. So if you think about like baseload power that you can build an economy on, you think about power that does data centers, factories, the industrial processes, solar and batteries are a long, long way from doing that. And many, many studies have shown that in order to actually power that, the amount of overbuild that you'd have to do is pretty large. You're talking factors of like 10. So we're not close to powering the world with solar and batteries. And then that's a global view, right? If you start to go market by market, because remember, electricity is not a global market. It is a local spot market, space and time. You have places that just simply can't make that work. If you put solar panels all over Singapore, you get like 7% of their energy. We're in Massachusetts. We'd have to take the whole western part of Massachusetts and pave with solar panels just for the fundamental physics to work to power Massachusetts. That's not gonna work. We need energy sources that you can build anywhere, you can build at scale, you can build at any time, you can run at any time. Energy is something that people want, when they want it, where they want it. When I flip the light switch on, the light above my head has to turn on. That's what this provides that sort of dispatchable baseload power.
So your ambition, Bob, is of course not just to build one ARC power plant. I've heard you say you want to build hundreds, maybe thousands of ARCs all across the world. Can you describe what you would expect the cost curve to look like as you go from 1 to 10 to 100 and beyond?
Yeah, so one of the really intriguing parts about fusion is, it doesn't really consume natural resources, right? The fuel is a rounding error, like the amount of
deuterium, tritium, lithium.
Yeah, it's sort of the best way to think of it is it's deuterium and lithium, but like really, there's not a lot of stuff to talk about in it because the amount is so small, right? So it's totally a rounding error in cost and availability. And there's enough fuel on the planet to run the planet many times longer than the sun will be around. So like it's the definition of sustainable. Okay. The key thing is it's all about knowing how to make a machine that works, a machine that can create the right conditions inside of it for the reaction to actually occur. Okay. So that's a technology. Once you know how to do that, you will make those machines in factories. And of course, those machines, they'll get cheaper to manufacture. We'll get better insights into simplifying them. We'll learn how to make them higher performant, lower cost. Now, that's been the history of anything that did that switch from a resource that you consume to a technology that you build. The horses didn't get better, the cars got better.
Yes.
Right? And so that's what happens with a technology like this.
Produce horses in factories, we produce cars in factories.
Right, exactly.
And so one of the critiques of nuclear fission has been the cost curve did not actually slope downward, it's actually gone up per unit. Whereas solar, the industry's figured out how to scale to the billions with a standardized panel. So you're saying fusion is more like solar than it is like fission? Am I reading you?
You sort of have to pick it apart a bit. So like, nuclear has actually been one of the things that's been a bit unique in the history of manufacturing and industrialization, and that it got more expensive. But it got more expensive because we understood the risks. We understood what the impacts were. We layered on the necessary controls so that we could manage that technology safely. It was actually on a cost curve of coming down, and then it reversed because of that. In addition, the projects got really big and they got really one-off, and we stopped building them.
Yes.
And so that meant that the experience didn't roll over. Like
atrophy.
Exactly. If you had to like build a car just once every 10 years, like that car would be really expensive. And so that's a sort of unique thing that happened in nuclear fission. Now we think that in fusion, as you build them out, that won't happen. The regulatory case is much, much simpler. The hazard base is much, much more compact.
Just to be clear, the 2023 regulatory guidance provides that fusion will be regulated like a particle accelerator, not like a nuclear fission plant with multi-year licensing requirements.
That's correct.
Yeah.
In fact, you're standing in a facility right now that already has this operating license. So most nuclear, you have to go through multi-year billion-dollar class to just build, to construct. And then you do again to operate. And there's no one that really has that operation license of a new class of nuclear power plant in the United States, which is the gold standard for the world. This already has its operating license. And that's because the hazard base in fusion is very different. I mean, it's the opposite reaction, right? Like you're still—
There's no chain reaction risk.
There's no chain reaction. There's no uranium, there's no plutonium, there's no meltdown, there's no long-lived nuclear waste. You have to be careful with the workers. It's an industrial facility. I mean, you see this industrial or
hard hats on.
PGE, exact. But it's an industrial facility that's more like other industrial facilities where it's a hazard, that you have to maintain on the site, but the public is not, doesn't have scenarios to impact that.
Just for our listeners, the radioactive waste survives for a matter of years, not decades.
It's decades, not millennia.
Okay.
Yeah. It's actually regulated. Interestingly, it's regulated in the United States and in the UK, which have both passed laws about the regulation after their regulators went through and evaluated everything. The laws agreed and put those into law, that fusion will be regulated separate from fission, and it will be regulated under a framework that is very akin to like cancer treatment centers or nuclear medicine. And that makes sense because it's a similar type of hazard from a overall protection of the workers and public.
Okay, I want to switch gears to geopolitics. I come from the White House National Security Council, and one observation that any of us could make is that solar, batteries, EVs, they were all invented in the US and scaled up in China. Why does the fusion story end differently?
Still to be written, frankly. So the US has been a historical leader in the science part of fusion. Built the most fusion experiments, has the largest annual budget that goes into plasma physics, which is one of the key pieces of the fusion system.
You're a plasma physicist.
I'm a plasma physicist by background, MIT. And so funded by the U.S. Department of Energy, that's where fusion lives. And right now, within the U.S. Department of Energy, it lives within the Office of Science. And therein is actually a bit of a conundrum, because the neighbors of that office are like making new elements and like searching for the Higgs boson and the fundamentals of the universe. They're not thinking about an industrial policy.
Yeah.
So the United States has a framework for industrial policy, but not really any action on industrial policy for fusion, but has the lead in the science innovation. But how to get that out to the market? There's green shoots, but we've seen that before, and frankly, they're not growing fast enough. Meanwhile, internationally, they have industrial policy. And they put together multi-billion-dollar policies to take their companies, scale them fast. Meanwhile, here we're still in venture capital land, federal government sort of not.
What do we have here? We have regulatory guidance. We talked about that. There's the Department of Energy milestone program, which I know you were an awardee of that program, but it's in the tens of millions of dollars,
Yes.
not the billions. But there are no like chip-style investment grants. There are no purchase agreements from the government. There's not a fast track for permitting. I mean, if you had a wish list of actions the U.S. government could take on industrial policy for fusion, what's missing?
Yeah, it's actually, I don't have to ask me for the wish list. The Industry Association has actually put together a really comprehensive plan. That plan mirrors things like the National Academies of Sciences, the sort of blue ribbon panels that the government convenes. It mirrors some think tanks and strategic competitive studies project, people like study AI and competitiveness. All of it is really consistent. One, we've got a couple things that we've done right. the regulatory structure is actually right. The rest is just make sure that fusion is not any worse off than any other energy technology from permitting, right? There's some things like, okay, supply chain, like just make sure it's part of the supply chain, tax incentives for everything. Then there's some fusion specific things, which the bill for that is like somewhere around $10 billion. And like where that would be is, and that would put us into leadership with the rest of the world if we spent it the right way. And that is take the labs, universities we have, which are strong, but move them more to a industrial policy for the first generation of deployments instead of just starting the science. Commercial, like take the problems that are in the future instead of the problems of the past and work on those. Those are material science, et cetera. Take the labs, universities, we need better test stands. We need the test stands that the wind tunnels that support an industry, right? Those are historically things that companies don't build themselves, that are places where you go and test things, test ideas, test materials. Those have been identified, we need to build them, like actually shovels in the ground, building those things. And really importantly, the third piece is we need a program that is like the milestone program. It could be the milestone program, but bigger, that is a public-private partnership that puts money into the first generation of power plants. Because those plants, they're not gonna be out of the box economic.
Sure.
Right? First of a kind always has
the expensive ones.
The expensive ones, they're gonna operate somewhat shakily at first as they learn. And in the past, the government has been there to help get those plants built. You know, ARDP is a program in fission that's been successful. You go all the way back, you see these early deployments where the CapEx heavy piece, buying, you know, cement, steel, labor, the government helps with that while we test out the ideas. And this whole package is pretty well scoped out, but it requires, you know, action by the administration in Congress. And we're optimistic that will happen, but we're wasting a lot of time because that's already happening in the other countries. And their packages are significantly more favorable. You know, they have a different view of public-private partnership where the government's taking an active role. And right now we have talk, we have frameworks, but at the ground, you really don't see the impact.
So one of the big themes in markets this year, and I expect it will be for many years to come, is the weaponization of choke points. You know, we're seeing that right now with the Strait of Hormuz. We've seen it in rare earths, leading edge AI chips. As you think about your supply chain, are there particular inputs that you think are vulnerable to that type of geopolitical coercion, and how are you managing that risk?
Yeah, one of the crazy things about fusion is that the overall scale of the industry, the impact is very large, but the physical scale is not very big, right?
Right.
You're building power plants, and yeah, you have to build thousands of power plants. There are thousands of coal plants. There are thousands of gas plants. So like it's that scale, but the stuff that goes in to the plant is not fuel. It's not stuff that is choked off and the plant's shut off because they don't get fuel. That's Hormuz, right? That's Russian pipelines of gas. But it's also like mostly steel. It's mostly manufactured things. So when you think about like the footprint of that supply chain, that footprint is way, way, way smaller than like industries we're used to thinking.
It's not a leading edge semiconductor with 130 countries.
Yeah, it's like smaller than the semiconductor industry. It's kind of like commercial aviation building, like the Embraers and Boeings. It's not the automobiles. It's not shipbuilding. It's actually funny. It's like the amount of steel in like a fusion economy is not like the amount of steel in shipbuilding. It's like the amount of steel in like shipping container building. Okay. Like it's like way smaller.
We're not very good at building ships anymore in the US. I hope we're better at building fusion plants.
I hope so. And there's reason to think that we could be because, you know, frankly, like the value add is so much higher, right? This is a complex technology, but complexity is something that is getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And complexity is something that you can maintain an advantage in through iteration and learning versus rolling steel or making 1 billion solar panels. Those are hard things to compete against other nations on.
Bob, it's fascinating and inspiring to see what you're doing here. I just want to close on this question. What do you think is the most mistaken belief held by, let's just say, the consensus scientific community or investor community about fusion that you want to dispel?
Yeah, you know, the scientific community is actually pretty well aligned. This is very, very possible. There's questions about the timeline, but the timeline hinges not on discovery. It hinges on delivery. It hinges on the ability to build things. And so places like Devon's, like here, that show this ability to go very, very quickly, right? This sort of mentality that comes from the private sector, from startups. That's the SpaceX mentality when compared to NASA, like really opened opportunities. That's what's happening in fusion. So the scientific community is well aligned, but the broader community, still has this belief that this is somehow impossible, right? That like this is because we've worked on it for so long.
The energy of the future and always will be.
Yeah. And this is a very, very common phenomenon that you can go to every major technology breakthrough and you can find that it went from impossible to inevitable really fast. However,
You mentioned SpaceX, 2015, the rocket comes back,
right? People thought
lands. Is SPARC turning on?
What do you think so? The large language models, same thing happened in AI. Same thing happened in flight. Like there was people saying that was impossible and they were out there flying in North Carolina. And
I'm from close to Kitty Hawk. So
yeah, and like a few people knew, and if you were really looking carefully, right? Yeah. If you were looking at what was happening in the research community, you would see in flight, people were gliding. In AI, you would see ChatGPT 2, you would see the beginning of scaling, right? In rockets, you would see the small demonstrations of the reusable hopper. Like if you really look deep, you can actually see these sort of step change transitions before they happen. Picking the timing's kind of hard, but you don't really have to get the timing right because the markets are so big.
Bob Mumgaard, CEO of Commonwealth Fusion Systems, thanks for the tour. When SPARC goes live, I'll come back.
Great. Thanks for coming and seeing.
Thanks a lot.
Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. Views and opinions expressed may not reflect PGIMs and are subject to change. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended as investment advice. References to specific companies are for illustrative purposes only and should not be interpreted as recommendations to purchase or sell securities. PGIM and its affiliates may hold positions in the securities of companies referenced herein. This is not a solicitation. Please visit pgim.com for important disclosures and additional information, including details on non-U.S. jurisdictions. Prudential Financial Inc. of the United States is not affiliated in any manner with Prudential plc, incorporated in the United Kingdom, or with Prudential Assurance Company, a subsidiary of M&G plc, incorporated in the United Kingdom. Copyright 2026 Prudential Financial Inc. and its related entities. Prudential, PGIM, the Prudential logo, and the rock symbol are service marks of PFI and its related entities, registered in many jurisdictions worldwide.